Hello folks, J. Scott Phillips here, and today we are bound for survival with a look at James Merriam Moore's World War II adventure, Courage of a Coward, which was first published in the March 1961 issue of Argosy magazine. And this is a salute to the first week of Spring into Adventure, a new BookTube event that's been created by Mark at Book Time with Elvis and Sean D. Standfast. And it's celebrating adventure fiction of all kinds. Adventure crosses into a lot of different genres. And the first week is to be shorter adventure fiction, 200 pages or less. And I was about to kind of merge this with another video that I've been planning on doing here for a little bit as part of my series of looking at Golden Age science fiction stories, authors, and artwork. And I was working on one for C.L. Moore, which I'm looking forward to do, but at the last minute, just as I was kind of wrapping up some things on the research end of that, I came across another resource that I wanted to incorporate into it, and that meant ordering a book that I'm now waiting for. And since I don't want this first week of Spring into Adventure to get away from me, I want to post something, so I'm falling back on a plan B and decided to do something a little different this time, just for the sake of time and of doing, well, something different. And that is to go back to some old magazines, and in this case, the Argosy magazine I mentioned, the March 61 issue, and take a look at a short story from that issue by another Moore, and that's James Merriam Moore. Now, I don't know much about James Merriam Moore, and I couldn't find much about him. But apparently he wrote a lot of short stories back from as far back as the mid-1930s on up at least well into the 60s. And I don't find much about him or some of the stories that he's written without really doing a deep dive on that. And this is supposed to be a Plan B video here, so I haven't done that for this one. But he seems to have written a lot of military fiction, World War II fiction, and maybe a few other types of war adventures. But he's been published mostly as short stories, mostly in magazines like Argosy, as I've mentioned, Esquire, Collier's, Red Book, Blue Book, and probably some others. And I just have not had the time or inclination, really, to look into all those. He is somewhat known for, well, I don't know how well he's known for this, because it's a little obscure, but he is credited with having written a short story for a magazine that was picked up and used as the pilot episode for the old ABC 1962 Warner Brothers TV series, The Gallant Ones. And that is a TV series that I am only vaguely familiar with from my dim memories. I don't recall any episodes or even if I've ever seen any. However, it was a kind of a combat-like series that followed an infantry unit that was fighting its way through Italy in World War II, and that's what the TV series was about. It only lasted one season, so it's probably why we don't hear much about it. But that does give us a chance to look at some artwork from a magazine from back in the heyday of illustration. And this is something that I'm kind of happy to be able to do as this Plan B after all, because a lot of the artwork that was published in a lot of the short stories and serializations of novels that appeared in the magazines that were so prevalent back in the early and mid, maybe even into the late part of the 20th century, that's all gone by the wayside. And whenever any of those stories have been reprintable in other collections or things, the artwork is left behind and has never seen the light of day since being printed in those original magazine editions and just tossed out with the weekly trash, unfortunately. So I have been collecting such magazines for quite a while, so I was able to dive into that stack of literature and pull out this issue here. So we'll take a look at some of that artwork a little later. But in the meantime, what about Argosy magazine itself? Here are a few of the covers just to kind of show you the evolution of the magazine since its inception in the 1880s. And Argosy was one of the early Muncie pulp magazines. It was first published as the Golden Argosy in 1882 as a children's weekly. And it went on from there to become sort of more of a men's adventure magazine. But in 1888, the name of the magazine was shortened to just the Argosy. And in 1920, it merged with All Story Weekly and became Argosy All Story Weekly. And then in 1929, just Argosy. And it was the home to a lot of great adventure writers like Edgar Rice Burroughs, Horatio Algiers, Earl Stanley Gardner, Zane Grey, on and on. And that brings us up to the March 1961 issue of Argosy magazine and our story today, Courage of a Coward. Now, that's kind of a misleading title, really, because there's no cowardice in the story. There is an agenda, and there is the accusation of potential cowardice, I guess, between these two main characters here. They are two American pilots during the Burma campaign in the Burmese jungles. And they're trying to catch up to a British regiment that is on an important mission along this river in the jungle. And the two pilots are in two separate planes. One is the pilot of a tow plane, and his name is Stu Seaton. And the other pilot who outranks him, Lieutenant John Dale, is the pilot of a cargo glider that the tow plane is towing. So you've got the small main plane up ahead towing a much larger cargo plane that's intending to bring supplies and pack mules to the British regiment if they can catch up to them. But they are downed in a huge rainstorm, and the tow plane, the lead plane, crashes into the jungle, while the glider is able to somewhat safely, but kind of make an emergency landing in this field between a cliff and a river. But in that landing, the cargo doors fly open, and all the mules bolt. And so they're scattered out of the four winds. But Lieutenant Dale is able to find the pilot. He's survived, but he's got a badly injured leg, so he can't travel. But Dale is able to capture one of the mules, so now he can put Seaton on the mule, and they can at least travel. And now the idea is to catch up to that British regiment somewhere in the jungle ahead of them up along the river. Hopefully, if they're still alive and if they can make it without getting killed themselves. Japanese soldiers all through these jungles and across the river, both sides, and they're just everywhere, and they're hiding in the bushes, and it's a very dangerous hike, and we've got an injured pilot on a mule. But they are able to, after 3 days, catch up to the leftovers, they're called, of this British regiment. And the main column has been attacked by the Japanese and pretty badly beaten. So these are the leftovers. These are the sick and injured that have been left behind, while the survivors of the main column have been able to move ahead and try to complete, if they can, their very important mission, which we don't know what it is, but it's just to know it's important. Once that's done, then they will come back for the leftovers and bring back as many of them as can survive. But Seaton on the mule with the bad leg, once he sees what's going on here, this just disgusts him, and he wants his buddy Dale to let's just you and me and the mule move on ahead. Let's leave these guys behind. They've already been left behind. They're all goners anyway. They're not going to make it. Let's just get me up to the main unit here. Maybe there's a doctor, and then we can save me, because I'm an important person. I'm a pilot. And so we got to save me and get me out of here. That's our mission. That's what we got to do. These guys aren't going to make it anyway. And but that bothers Lieutenant Dale, and so he's got another plan. And that is to take as many of these sick and injured with him, or with them, back to his glider in that field, where they can put out these panel markers, these signal panels, that would give any reconnaissance plane a place to land safely. And that field there should be room enough for a rescue plane to land. But the problem there is that that kind of a plane would only be able to take out one passenger at a time. So however many can make it, they would have to make, 10 or more trips, one man at a time, out of the jungle and then come back. And so that could take hours to go in and out back and forth, and they'll probably get attacked by Japanese in the meantime, because that sort of a operation doesn't go unnoticed. But when they get there, finally they do. They get back with about 10 or 12 or so of these sick and injured, along with the 2 pilots and the mule. But Dale has even a better plan. He has been training in this thing called the Snatch as a glider pilot. A glider pilot. There's not much he can do about it. He needs the main plane to be able, to be able to carry out the Snatch. And Seaton's plane has crashed in the jungle, so they're going to have to rely on any rescue plane that comes. So the first rescue plane that comes, they're going to put Seaton on that, and the 2 pilots then will go back, and Seaton will come back with someone who has been trained in the Snatch. And I had to look this up. It's described pretty well in the story, but just so you know what it is, it's a special military operation that they developed that could accommodate a story like this. And let's just talk about the Snatch for a little bit. The Snatch was an aerial maneuver that was designed to allow a lead tow plane to fly in with the use of elastic cables and a hook to snatch a grounded glider, and then the 2 planes then could fly off together and get away. So a kind of an emergency situation, kind of the reverse of a modern jet fighter landing on the deck of an aircraft carrier, dangles that hook and grabs it to stop the jet on the short runway on the aircraft carrier. This is kind of the opposite of that, where it's going to take off now by grabbing something and flying something away from the ground, off into the wild blue yonder. So Dale's plan, if they make it back to that field and the glider, is to, under the cover of darkness at night, is to set up this kind of a football goalpost arrangement of cables tethered to his glider, so that if and when the tow plane can come back in, we'll be able to snag it under the dawn's early light, and they can make their getaway with the entire group of survivors from the Left Behinds. So that's the plan, but they got to get there first, and that's what the second half of the story is: the adventures on their death march, basically trying to get back to the field. There are casualties; they don't all make it. But, spoiler alert, they do finally make it back there. They are able to set out the signal markers, and a reconnaissance plane does come and land, takes Seaton out, and a couple hours later comes back with the tow plane, during which time Dale and the other survivors of the Left Behinds are able to rig up that kind of the catching net there for the hook to grab a hold of the glider, and they all get away to live another day. And very riveting story, actually. It's not very long, like I say, but I don't read a lot of war adventures, and having dipped into this one for this video here at the last minute, I had a good time reading it, and I think I'm going to try to read more, if not by James Merriam Moore, who is not easy to come across. Try to dip into some other World War II combat kinds of stories here, I think. It was a lot of fun, and just learning that one thing about the Snatch was kind of a cherry on top for me. It wasn't just the adventure, but there was some ingenuity to it, and they had to solve something in a way that, unless you're familiar with those kinds of operations, and who is, you just don't see that kind of thing coming. And then just the problems of the success and the casualties and all that. Very exciting, actually, for such a short story. It shows kind of to me, it was a little bit of some Captain Kirk thinking in there, which maybe is part of why I enjoyed it. Anyway, now let's move into the last section of the video here and talk about the illustration that was published with that story. And we'll talk about that for a little bit, and then we'll wrap it up. This is a double-page illustration, full bleed, full color, by Lou Feck, one of my favorite illustrators from the heyday of illustration here, and we've chatted about him a few other times in some of my videos. But this is, I think, a great example of why I am so sad that we don't have these kinds of magazines and short stories and serializations of fiction in magazines anymore. It's been decades, really, since we've gotten this kind of thing. In the day, these sorts of illustrations abounded. They were everywhere. And just for the smallest little stories that you might imagine would get these huge illustrations. And I think in many cases, like in this one, maybe even more impressive than the great illustrations that we might still get on paperbacks and hardcovers. Back then, these magazines were not the small magazine size like we have mostly today. These were often tabloid or larger size magazines. So when you opened up a double page illustration like this, it was a TV screen full. It was just great, and you could swim around in the details and the depth of these kinds of illustrations. Probably as long as it would take you to read the story itself is worth investigating the, I want to say, photo of the illustration. And Lou Feck was one of the greats. He was very prolific and paid a lot of attention to detail. Now, this particular scene, however, does not actually take place in the story. It might be a scene that might have been edited out for length, perhaps, but at any rate, if we read the caption, and by the way, this story does use some terminology that was acceptable back in its day that is now considered derogatory. So rather than using the derogatory term for the Japanese soldiers that was so prevalent back during World War II and into the 60s and maybe beyond, I will just say Japanese soldiers. But the caption here says, "The last Japanese soldier went down silently as the heavy sword's point struck him in the spine." Now, that technically does not happen in the story. And I would also say that that can't be the last Japanese soldier, since we see 4 or 5 others out in front of him. Maybe they say the last one in line got kills here, but it's similar to another scene, one of the adventures as they're on the march back to the field through the jungle. And by the way, it's raining half the time, and these huge downpours, they're just getting drenched. But we see in the background here, we do see this, that is a Gurkha. That is an Indian, one of the Indian troops that were attached to the British column. And he is killing the Japanese soldier there with his kukri. That is a very distinctive, large, kind of boomerang-shaped knife that the Gurkhas were famous for carrying. And in the actual story, it wasn't an entire unit of Japanese patrol here. It was just one Japanese soldier who was kind of lingering behind the crowd, and he's filling up his canteen and taking his own time. And that is when a Gurkha was able to sneak up behind him and stab him in the neck with his kukri. But this scene here is still just so rich in detail. It certainly captures the mood and the setting of the whole story. And just look at some of the detail that we've got here. This lead soldier here in the foreground, Japanese soldier. And we even get this detail here from Lou Feck of the red bars, the patches on his collar, that denotes that he is a private second class. And then the little red chevron over his right pocket there, those are his good conduct stripes. So just little details like that are thrown in there just complete this whole thing. And look what he's done with the rain here, with just these bold, long, heavy vertical strokes of white paint that just make the rain feel like it's just this oppressive shroud of hot, swampy, muggy rain just dropping down on you like wet blankets. It just really, you can almost hear the locusts in the background and just feel that sweltering heat. Really rich, and that's what Lou Feck always brings to the table, I think, is just the richness of scene and realism, and the detail is just so great. You can look at this thing forever. And just to give you an idea of why I personally like Lou Feck so much is because he was the cover artist for 3 of the James Blish Star Trek episode adaptations back in the late 60s and early 70s. And as well as doing a lot of great illustrations that I never got to see back in the day, and we never get to see anymore. These magazine illustrations that he did. So just to kind of put up on the screen here, those 3 fantastic Star Trek covers that I love so much, as well as some other magazine examples. And if you look at that top magazine example on the top right there, Hell Over Laos, that is another story by James Merriam Moore, coincidentally enough. So there's just another example of that. Then 2 more of his more adventurous illustrations down below. All these great full bleed double spread illustrations. And then I had a little room in the corner there, so I just threw in a Call the Conqueror cover that he did for a paperback back in the day, just to kind of fill it out there. Now, I know I keep saying this in a lot of my videos, but one of these days I'm going to do a dedicated video just on Lou Feck and his artwork and his contribution to the field. Because this is the kind of thing that, like I say, the magazine illustrations have just become lost to us now. You never really get to see them anywhere. And even though we still get to see plenty of Lou Feck artwork and other terrific artists on book covers that are still readily available and collectible, magazines, not so much. And they were for short stories and serializations that never made it beyond the magazine. So even the stories themselves are kind of lost in most cases. So this was a fun one to do. This is just kind of, like I say, a plan B. Threw it together this afternoon here, so I apologize for if I'm rambling even more than usual, but it was a lot of fun to do, just diving into a random stack of magazines and pulling one out without really reviewing it other than looking at the artwork and thinking if it was worth chatting about. So I did find this one, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. So I would like to do some more of these from time to time. So let me know if you like them. And I guess that's it for now. So once again, I want to thank the hosts and co-hosts of Spring Into Adventure, and I will leave links to their channels down below for you to check them out. And that's it for now, and thanks for watching.